VikesNow, Dustin Baker, the immediate post-game addition to Vikings Eagles on Monday Night Football. That was rough. That was a brutality, a fatality even. I think the thing that pains me the most is that week one against the Packers was so not glorious, but there was relief that this team, the roster of largely the same players from the 2021 roster, could indeed be coached to temporary glory. Well, now we're back to square one with that, thinking, all right, what is the ceiling for these guys after they got their asses kicked against the Eagles, and it wasn't very competitive. Special teams was good, but the rest was a bunch of malarkey, and I think we're back to square one with figuring out what do we have with this roster and this head coach. I believe formally that the honeymoon for Kevin O'Connell is kaput. Not that he sucks or not that the team sucks, but this was the first blemish on what hopes to be a 10 to 20 year long coaching resume. It was not good. I told you guys, or I predicted the Vikings to lose with Josh Fry, but I didn't think it would be complete futility. My big takeaways, I'll go through about 6 of them, are Kirk Cousins was bad in the second half. For whatever reason, there's one game per season, sometimes 1.5, where that man flat out isn't good. He's usually right about here, and the other guys are up here. He's right about there in terms of performance, and there's one game, sometimes 1.5 games, where he's way down here, and it feels miserable. Now, in the first half, he was average. He had the humongous drop by Irv Smith, but in the second half, he was under siege and was just throwing up complete wiffle balls, and that was inexcusable. And yeah, we got bad Kirk tonight, and it had to be on Monday Night Football when all of the narrative about him is that that is when he's on the naughty train. And indeed, bad Kirk showed up. So let's hope and pray and talk to the Norse gods that it was just that was the game in 2022. Like, we'll look back in November and be like, yeah, remember when he played like shit against the Eagles, and now since then he's scored blah 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 touchdowns to only blah 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 interceptions, because it reared its ugly head. We get that dude once per season where it's just terrible, and unfortunately for his sake, it had to be under the bright lights against the Eagles, a team he usually plays well against. The defense was not good. They ended up giving up 486 yards. Most of that was in the first half, which set the tone for a Mike Tice-like defense, Leslie Frazier-like defense. That was complete Swiss cheese. I had no confidence after that first drive or two that they were going to be able to stop. Now, they made plays kind of when it didn't really matter. Good for them. They at least tried to claw back into the game. But it really felt like I was a teenager watching the Vikings in 2003 or so. I would have been 19 when those Tice defenses just didn't do anything on defense, and you just hoped that Moss and the guys would do enough to outscore them. It felt like a throwback to those naughty times when the defense wasn't very good. Now, in the last 2 years under Zimmer, the defense wasn't very good either, but this felt worse than that. The Zimmer defense collapsed at inopportune times in 2021. There's no doubt about that. But it reminded me of the Christmas Day game against the Saints, where they just got obliterated on the ground. This wasn't necessarily on the ground. It was everywhere. But I would really hope that having a bad defense was just an outlier against a good football team on the road, because I don't want to go through a Vikings life where the defense is garbage. No, thank you. They just gave up chunk yardage over and over. Every time they touched the ball, I was like, oh, yeah, here comes 7 yards. I hope it's just 7. I think some other things for perspective are the Eagles indeed have the best offensive line in football, and if you disagree with that, then it's got to be top 3. Plain and simple, they do. So if you're trying to figure out why Zadarius Smith and Danielle Hunter couldn't get pressure, it's because the Eagles have spent a lot of money and drafted well and have made wise roster decisions to employ an offensive line that you want this team to eventually have, a good one. It works wonderful when you have a mobile quarterback who can run the ball, and then who's growing as a passer. He can sit back and cook. And even the Vikings, what I thought was a defensive line, really, for the most part, couldn't do anything against an extremely stout Philadelphia offensive line. A couple more things that jumped off the page. The special teams for the Vikings was good. I know you don't care about that with the wounds are so raw and new. But the punter, we see more and more every game, or any time we see the guy, why Ryan Wright was chosen over Jordan Berry. He averaged like 49 point something yards per punt, and everyone he kicks looks like a boomer. like not the age-related boomer, but a boomer punt. And so they got that going for them. Patrick Peterson had the sweet block. Joseph was a footnote because it was just an extra point. But as much as this game was painful to watch, like from the jump, the special teams weren't a problem. And we could have had many a show where we sat here and berated special teams not that long ago. For now, that feels like the good part of the team. So if the defense and Mr. Cousins can get their act together, the special teams should be waiting to say, hey, we've been here trying to keep you in games. The biggest takeaway for me, outside of the Cousins bad game, because he was bad in the second half, was the missed opportunities. Even when it felt like the Eagles were straight rolling, beating their ass, time and time again, I think there was like 4 times where there was glimmers of hope to get back into the thing, and they just didn't. I think mainly the Irv Smith drop in the second quarter of a sure touchdown, which I think would have been 50-something yards. I have to go back and look at the tape. Once that happened, I was emotionally finished. I was like, all right, you can't make that play. Not that you need to be cut or your career is done, but we're not winning this game if you can't haul that in, because that would have set up a stage to trade haymakers. At that, I think that would have made it 17-14 heading into halftime, getting the ball at half. But it just flat out dropped it. And that's inexcusable, especially for a TE1 that's been forecasted for a breakout year for 4 consecutive years. Now, he'll be fine, he'll be back, but that was not a good moment for him because I believe it fundamentally would have changed the game. And for me, it was like, all right, this is one of those nights that nothing is going according to plan, and therefore my hopes that they're going to win are vanquished. The Patrick Peterson blocked field goal, the first blocked field goal in 4 years for the Vikings. That was another, just this little, you just put your hand, like a cat puts his paw underneath the bathroom door. It felt like, all right, this is the opportunity that they're going to get back into it. But Cousins was on his bullshit, and it ultimately was all for nil. And I think altogether there was about 4 moments where a reasonable playoff contending football team could have seized that moment and got back into it. Now, of course, that's predicated on the defense actually continuing to tackle, but they just really didn't stop them much of the night, especially when the Eagles went into their version of Zimmer ball, where it was like, all right, we scored enough. These guys are jokers. We're going to beat them no matter what. They took their foot off the gas to an extent. We're going to get into this ad nauseum for the next 4 days, but one of the biggest problems is that the Lions are on the docket. Normally, that would be a pushover. You'd look at it and go, woo, at least we get to go home and play the Detroit Lions. Well, I got news for you. The Detroit Lions offense is suddenly good. I believe it ranks 7th in the NFL per offensive EPA per play. So you might live in a world where it's not a guaranteed win next Sunday when they play the Lions. The Lions defense is poor. So is the Vikings now, evidently, after this game. So you could have a shootout on your hands. These Lions aren't last year's Lions where they're buffoonish on offense. They are using their weapons. Jared Goff looks reborn to whatever extent that can be perceived. So I'm going to warn you guys that this game, I'm still going to pick the Vikings to win because I believe there's a good football team in there in its DNA. But the Lions, this isn't your grandpa's Lions. They're not going to be poop, and it's not going to be easy. Finally, the Monday night demons have not dissipated. I wrote an article, and I think we talked about this on the show last week, that it's been 13 years since the Vikings beat a team on Monday night on the road that wasn't the Bears. That was Gus Frerotte against the Saints in 2008. I believed, perhaps, in the best laid plans with a new coach who didn't give a shit about the past or Monday night losses, that this could be different. Well, they might have run into a dangerous Eagles team that turns out to go to the NFC Championship, and then you'll look back and say, oh, of course they got their ass kicked. But the road demons for the Minnesota Vikings are very much alive. 7 straight times they've played a road game against a team not named the Bears, and they have lost. Now, you can't fix this until next year because I believe Monday night games are done. You've got a couple prime-timers. Is it the Cowboys in November that's in prime time? I think there's 2 more prime time games, and I don't know if they'll flex one late in December, but that little inkling inside you that said, yeah, they might win this game. There's a new sheriff in town. It was the same Vikings from the last 13, 14 years that showed up for a road Monday night game, and you'll have to wait a year for them to remedy that problem. All right, that's all I got. Hopefully that wasn't too indicting for you. I'll be back, let's see, for your purposes, Wednesday with Josh Fry. We'll get his take on this meltdown, and then we'll forecast the Lions for the rest of the weeks thereafter. And hey, this is only week 2. I should have said that in the show. If they want to get this nasty garbage out of their system, this is the time to do it. If they are indeed a good football team, you don't want this demon showing up in December or January. So, with that, Skol, baby.